I'm Jason Klamm, and this is the Comedy on Vinyl podcast. The year is 1961. The album is The Songs and Comedy of the Smothers Brothers at the Purple Onion. I never give it the full title, actually recorded at the Purple Onion. The artist, of course, is Smothers Brothers, and my guest this week is Graham Clark. Thank you so much for doing the show. I'm so excited.
Thank you for having me. We played a real game of cat and mouse for some time.
We really did.
Trying to organize this, and it's finally arrived.
And in this case, I was the mouse, and I caught a cat. That's kind of weird. So for those who do not know, somehow Graham is the co-host of my favorite podcast, one of my favorite comedians, and he picked one of my favorite comedy albums of all time, which is already on screen if you're watching it, but now it's on here twice. The Smothers Brothers of the Purple Onion. What? Now you have it on vinyl too. Rarely do people ever actually have the vinyl records to talk about in their hand. So I'm curious what yours looks like, because even the one that I have here is totally different than what I'm holding.
It's old, and
yes,
it's signed by the Smothers Brothers.
Son of a gun. Did you get it signed by the Smothers Brothers?
I did, yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
my. Then screw the rest of the show. Let's talk about that first.
I years and years ago, I opened for the Smothers Brothers over, I think, 3 different nights.
Wow.
3 different cities, and they were the nicest 2 men, and they were very old-time show business, which was fantastic. Like, backstage, they hung their pants up so they wouldn't get a crease in their pants. So I was hanging out backstage with the Smothers Brothers in their boxers, which was fantastic. Yeah, and they killed every night. They, doing jokes, some of which were like, 5 decades old or whatever. Still killed, still funny, still fresh.
What year was this? What year was this that you were doing this?
This would have been one of the last years they were touring, because they announced their retirement shortly thereafter. So I think like 2009.
Okay.
Yeah, 2009, I think.
Wow, that's more recent than I even realized they were still performing, because when I saw them once, and there was no opportunity to get anything signed, but of course I was not working with them. But I saw them once, and they were like, "Oh, cool, we can just bust out the old LBJ material, and Nixon material, but it'd be about Bush," and it was perfectly legitimate, worked brilliantly. Yeah. Always on top of it. And it's not even like they were doing well for their age. No. They were hot and doing a brilliant job.
Yeah, that was kind of my, I always thought they were really funny, but I thought exactly what you thought, like, this is going to be a nostalgia act. Because that's like, I've seen Bob Newhart, and that's kind of what Bob Newhart does, is he's kind of like, I'll answer questions about Newhart and all that kind of stuff. And he played videos and stuff like that, but it wasn't really a stand-up show. And this was just like a show. The Smothers Brothers just put on like this fantastic show, so funny, so tight. It was so inspirational to see them, and to see them 3 different nights doing the exact same set,
right? And
it killing, every single night just the same way.
Oh, that's remarkable. What were the 3 cities you were performing in?
Calgary, Edmonton, and I believe we also hit Red Deer, but
okay.
it could be conflating that with something else, but for sure, because I know my family came to it in Calgary, and then we went up to Edmonton the next day, or maybe it was 2 shows in Edmonton. Maybe that's what it was.
Okay.
But anyways, it was fantastic, and they played at like big old theater, and I think maybe they hadn't announced that it was their last tour, but they retired shortly thereafter. So
yeah, it's so good. Good God.
Good. And they, because you're based out of the States, is that correct?
Yeah.
Growing up in Canada, the Smothers Brothers were spokespersons for Shreddies, the series.
What is this? Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah. They it was either Shreddies or Shredded Wheat, but they did a "Mom Always Liked You Best" routine in this commercial, and so that's how I first knew the Smothers Brothers, was through that commercial. I didn't know that they were comedians or anything. I thought they were just creations of an ad executive,
Yeah. These 2 old brothers.
Yeah.
You know what? Okay, you know what? Somebody's going to call me out, and I'm betting they had the commercial here, and I'm just forgetting it. So if any American wants to give me shit, please don't. I probably just forgot. Because now that you're saying it, I think that might have existed here, too.
That would be wild, because I thought it was a Canada only. Because sometimes
I'll have to check.
People would make ads in Canada and they would only be broadcast in Canada. Like Johnny Cash did an ad for Toronto Dominion Bank
Uh-huh.
um, in like the early 80s, but it was
Mm-hmm.
kind of like, you know how celebrities could record ads in Japan and not worry
Sure.
about
Yeah,
them?
yeah,
It
yeah.
was the same kind of thing with Canada.
Please tell me it had something to do with "You'll always be in the black" because he's the man in black. If you're doing
It
a bank
was,
commercial.
you know what it was? It was advertising the first ATMs
Uh-huh.
at Toronto Dominion Bank, and it was so you don't have to walk the line. And so that's
Holy
what it is.
shit. Damn
Yeah.
it, that's better. No, that's better. These ad geniuses are much smarter than I am. Wow. I love okay, so I always love when we discover these things through sideways methods. I don't know how I discovered the Smothers Brothers except that, this record or the version that's hanging on my wall was like my grandmother's and that was eventually passed down to me and I listened to this one countless times.
Yeah.
When did you first discover whatever version of their comedy you discovered?
Well, there was the commercial, and then when I was kind of in grade school, I was really wanting to like learn how to do yo-yo tricks. So
Yes.
my mom bought me a VHS cassette that came with a yo-yo, and it was Tommy Smothers doing his Yo-Yo Man
So
character.
good.
So I knew that, and then I started kind of putting it together who these guys were.
Hmm.
My parents didn't have Smothers Brothers records. They had a lot of comedy records, but no Smothers Brothers. And then in the '90s, on In Living Color, there was they did a parody of the Smothers Brothers called The Brothers Brothers, and then that's when it started to like it all conflated at that point that this guy they were classic comedy act, and so I got my hands on. I don't think it was this album. I think it was Curb Your Tongue, Knaves. Is that what
Sure.
it's called? Yeah.
Yeah.
And I thought I was like, there's just nobody that's got timing like this.
Mm-mm. Mm-mm.
When I first listened to it, I was like, this is. It seems casual. That's the thing about them. They
Mm-hmm.
seem like this is the first time they're doing this bit, and you know that it's not, but they do kind of lull you into that feeling that
Mm-hmm.
that they're just goofing around, and the Tommy's really just he's like that
Mm-hmm.
and so they play their character so well. I just the first time I listened to it I was hooked.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to remember what bits are on there. I have them all. Big brag. But I mean, I've listened to all of them, and their stuff starts to bleed together until I realize that this is one of the ones. Again, I will not make this about me. It's just that like my other friends who were not as comedy nerdish as I was, I
Mm-hmm.
still got hooked on this particular record, and I've been trying to figure out forever why this had such wide appeal. And I don't know if it is just the timing or if it might just be the casualness with which he plays a fucking idiot who's also got, every punch. Poor Dickie, not poor Dickie, but that man is just so willing to give everything over to Tom.
Yeah,
And
he's
that's huge.
he's probably, I mean, it's arguable, but he's probably the best straight man that I can think of.
Mm-hmm.
Like that, because he doesn't seem like he's playing a character. He
No.
does seem like he's the guy who wants to get down to singing the song. They've done this in rehearsal, and why can't Tommy get it right? And it's so well done because yeah, Tommy would be hilarious on his own, but it's triple as hilarious having Dickie be his straight man. And I think he's probably like I have a hard time picturing who would be a better straight man than Dick Smothers.
Right. And the crazy part to me also is just later on when if you delve deeper into how much, just how important the Smothers Brothers were to, political activism on American TV, when you
Mm-hmm.
realize that Tommy is like, he's the one who behind the scenes is screaming at people to be like, no, fuck, we need to make this, we need to push it until we're canceled, basically. He didn't
Yeah,
want to be canceled, but he was hard,
and
hard on
that
him.
that I didn't know until years and years after first
Hmm.
listening to them. I had no idea that there was that dimension to their career,
Hmm.
and so it was like unwrapping a package. Like it was like, oh, there's this whole other level to these guys that wasn't this kind of innocent kind of folk duo. They were
Right.
like this very on the cutting edge, kind of dangerous comedians in their day.
I also love too that, yeah, look at the cover. They're very clean cut. Yes, they're playing folk music, but the first joke on this record is him saying "sing along with bitch" instead of, and it's barely a joke, but it is hilarious to me. Like, it's just like, oh, isn't it cute? Oops, I misunderstood what to say. Obviously, he didn't. He's a grown man, and I just love that it works, and the audience catches it. Not like everything; they miss a few of them.
Yeah, yeah, and it's like, it's just they don't overdo it. Like he'll say a phrase like, we the sailors going to town and to pick up their oars, but they don't dwell on it. They don't make it like eight examples of it. It's just
Right.
one, maybe one repeat, and then on with the,
Yeah.
Dick gets flustered, and then on with the song.
And there's, and it's also just actually casual enough that they're enjoying one another. So you get to hear them laughing at, definitely hear Dick laughing at Tommy throughout it, even though he's playing the straight man.
Yeah, and that's when I saw them live. That was very easy to pick up on that they genuinely were enjoying each other's presence. They're not like people who had separate dressing rooms and only talked to each other on stage. They traveled around in a bus together, and I'm sure they were like the best of friends, which is
Right.
it's a nice thing to watch.
Did Tommy do any of the yo-yo stuff on this tour that you saw him on?
Yeah,
Because he did when I saw. Okay, all right.
yeah, he came out kind of in the second half of the show,
Mm-hmm.
and did a bunch of yo-yo tricks, and he does this like very funny dance to the Yo-Yo Man music, and it was great because then it really, at that point, it all came together. It's the Yo-Yo Man and the Smothers brothers, and yeah, I think I even asked them about the the commercial, and they made some kind of joke about it, like,
Mm-hmm.
we needed the money or something like
Sure.
that. Yeah.
That was the time too. I'm assuming this is in the 80s or 90s. The commercial you're talking about, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So it's around the time that there was all of a sudden this resurgence, and they got the Smothers Brothers, the new comedy hour that CBS gave them, like for like a little reunion show.
Right.
And when they decided to no longer, they're like, you guys can be edgy now. They're like, okay. And then they decide not to be. They're just completely straight edge. And that's their way of being punk, which I find adorable and funny, and a big fuck you to the place that canceled them.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like during the show they talked about it, and I
Mm-hmm.
think maybe they showed a video kind of clip show kind of video, and it was fascinating. And then
Yeah.
I like after that the documentary Smothered came out.
Yes, I love it.
Yeah, and so then I watched that, and then I got kind of the full breadth of who they are, and what they did, and it made me love them even more.
People should watch that documentary. It's a good documentary. Came
It's
out
a very
like
good
10
documentary. Yeah.
years ago or something. But my God, there's a lot on this record to talk about. I don't know if you want to go track by track.
We can do.
We
Yeah.
can. It starts out with a song entitled Pretoria, which, I mean, it just for those who don't know, I guess I could just explain. They're funny folk people. Folk music
Yeah.
was so huge at this time, and they decided to, I'm assuming, turn an existing folk act into a comedy act, because a lot of people were doing that because folk music wasn't really cutting it anymore, and nobody was coming to see the shows. And there was banter between the folk music, and then that, for some people, became an act, I think, no more obviously than these guys.
Yeah, I wondered about that kind of their whole thing. Were they a folk music duo that told jokes, or were they a comedy duo that played music?
Right.
And this album, it's very music centric.
Yes, very much so.
And I think some of their other albums, like the bits are a bit longer, and then like the songs kind of are in the back seat a bit.
Mm-hmm.
But this one, it's like the music is front and center. They're singing like classic folk songs.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? They could put out an album of just them singing. They're good. Like
Mm-hmm.
they are sound fantastic.
Yeah, beautiful voices and great performers too. Dickie did release. I call him Dickie. It's Dick. Sorry, I'm not his brother.
No,
Dick,
but he calls him Dickie, so I think you're in the
I
right.
guess I'm fine. He did release. I still haven't heard it. He did release a music only album. Around this during this period, because
Oh
he's like,
wow!
Yeah. I still have not listened to it because, you know, everybody's like, don't listen to it. It's like, why not? Just does I don't only buy comedy records, but I should give it a shot.
Yeah, I mean, it couldn't be, it couldn't be bad if it's him singing and he's got a
Mm-mm.
beautiful voice and does good, arrangements. And yeah,
Exactly.
why wouldn't it work?
I had, again, I'm so pleased that you picked this because for about a billion reasons that we won't go over, but just every time a new bit would come back to me, it's like, oh fuck, I have most of this memorized. I've heard it that many
Is
times.
that right?
Yes,
Oh, that's
yeah.
fantastic.
There's some specific things that were became because this is how fucking dumb nerds my friends and I were. These became catchphrases amongst us.
Okay.
It's something from 30 years, 20 years before we were born.
Hmm.
So the first song, Pretoria, is they're talking about a march, and they just do this whole dumb bit about the bridge on the River Kwai,
And the
which
whistling.
and the whistling.
Yeah,
She whistled the words because the words were dirty.
that's right.
I'm realizing also explaining these gags is hard to do without doing the entire thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But it's the if the people out there haven't heard the album,
Hmm.
a lot of the comedy bits in this particular album are all in the intros to the songs. So
Yes.
them kind of explaining where the songs come from, and then Tommy goes on a long-winded thing that's incorrect or
Hmm.
somewhat correct, and then veers off, and then they sing a song. So
Yeah.
it's good. That's kind of the pattern of the whole album.
There's so much. Also towards the end too, when he's doing that little bit where what does he say? Yeah, he says, "You sleep with me, I'll sleep with you," and then he whistles, and you can picture the dumb little like cute face he's making. He's like, "Get it?" It's so childish. I think this is what appealed to me as a kid and still does as a grown man that these 30-year-old men were acting like children.
Yeah, totally. And they, like I say, like their whole dynamic is not, it's not like Tommy's getting or Dickie's getting like flustered.
Hmm.
Like, because that's, I think, the way with a lot of comedy duos is the
Hmm.
one person would be the dumb person, the other one would be getting constantly flustered by them. But he doesn't get flustered. He just kind of gently corrects him
Yes.
and just kind of says, no, no.
It's very much the slow brother, the smart brother.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Absolutely.
A patient straight man, which is that is I mean it's I think it's another reason like Carl Reiner works so well in 2000-Year-Old Man, where he's the whole time he doesn't really question him as much as
Yeah.
like that sounds strange, but I'll keep going
Yeah.
with it. It's a yes and that is before yes and was a commonly understood term.
Yeah, and they also this was before their kind of catchphrase of "Mama always liked you best,"
Hmm.
and so it's like it's a more raw version of what they would kind of polish up over the years, and
Hmm.
then toured for they think they were a comedy duo for over 50 years.
It's insane.
It's insane. Yeah,
uh and beautiful. I love that.
yeah, me too.
Do you we'll dive back into the album, but
Sure.
I don't think I've ever heard you, and I hate this, and I know everybody talks about this on every comedy podcast. So I hate to ask how you got started in comedy, but I'm going to have to. But let's start at a specific place. You and I are both people who may or may not regret our film degrees. We both went to film school. I
That's
don't
right.
regret the degree. I regret the degree, not the experience. Maybe it was a good time. I like my time in film school.
Yeah, me too. And it was really expensive. I spent all the money I had to go
Hmm.
and lived with a friend of mine who let me live at his place for free.
Hmm.
And so I just lived at film school the whole time
Yeah.
I was there. I would sleep there a lot of the time. And, just that was it. That was just like consumed film, just
Yeah.
lived it for a year. And then yeah, afterwards he I was working on movie sets, and then
Mm.
there was I think it was an actor strike, but it might have been a writer strike, and the entire industry shut down.
Mm.
And so even people who were like 20-year veterans were out of work. So somebody who was just brand new to it was for sure out of work. So
Hmm.
I just kind of drifted away from it from then on, you know.
What were you shooting for? Directing? What did you do? Did you have a path in mind?
I think I liked writing, and
Mm-hmm.
then I found that I did like directing. And I know I'm not as technical as a lot of people who are on film sets. There's like a real film nerd kind of thing that comes out on film sets where
Uh-huh.
people are like, I know all about this lens and I know about this camera,
Mm-hmm.
and I never was interested in any of that. I was interested in like, what was the best way to shoot a comedy, and what was the best way to get people to say the lines like you think they should be said
Sure.
without giving them a line read.
Right, right, right.
Yeah. How about you? What do you specialize in?
Well, I thought I was going to be a director. Then we came out here, had we had a semester in LA, which was on the CBS lot out here, which is
Okay.
very exciting, makes you feel very cool. And
Yeah.
technically, it was like a producer class, and I'm like, oh, am I a producer? But there's a lot of writing involved. We had to pitch a script that we had written, so I had to pitch a script that a producer read. Again, makes you feel really big, and then you're
Yeah,
like,
yeah, of
oh,
course.
cool. And then it took a while for me to realize I'm none of those things really, even though I have since made 3 movies.
You have? Holy
Yes,
cow.
I insist on still making them. They cost no money, but I insist on making them, even though part of me is like, I think I'm a writer. I think I'm a this. I'm obviously been a podcaster for way too long, but you find these things, and I wish I'd have found something earlier, maybe to make me realize that because they told you when you came out here, don't be a multi hyphenate, and I think I was what's the word? Contrary. I was a huge contrarian, so I just kept making whatever I
Right.
wanted to. Did you? So in college, had you even tried stand up yet? Was how?
I did stand up when I was a teenager
Okay.
and always loved comedy, always loved stand up in particular.
Mm-hmm.
And to me that was like it was harder to consume stand up back then. Now
Yeah.
like it's just infinite that you can get on the internet, and Netflix has all these specials and you can kind of access it all. But back in the day you had to kind of scrounge for it, and you had to buy albums and you had to
Yeah.
know somebody that had the album so you could listen to it. And so I was always very enamored with stand up.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did it a bunch of times at like open mics, and I did a comedy competition when I was 14 or 15.
Shit.
Uh,
Okay.
um, and then I kind of, as I was doing the open mics and stuff, I was like, this seems sad. Like, it seems like the people here are sad.
Uh.
So I was like, I gotta go. I'll go get an education. And then I thought, thought I would never do it again. And then after the film industry shut down, I drifted back to stand up
Yeah.
because there was nothing else
Right.
going on. Yeah.
Holy shit, man. Yeah, I mean, if there's one thing that's going to survive when people are not allowed to, write for a living or do something that somebody has written for a living, you might as well, not that stand up isn't written, but you might as well do a thing that doesn't involve an entire crew, and you still get to
Yeah.
create, you still get to hopefully make people laugh.
Yeah, and it is the opposite end of the spectrum, whereas film is like incredibly collaborative,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to be, even though they may say like don't be a multi hyphenate, you do have to have all sorts of knowledge and experience of all the different components of a film, and the
Yeah.
different areas and departments people are working in. Um, and so you do need to have a bit. You do have to be like a little bit of a camera person and a little bit of a sound person, and have an eye for set deck and all that
Mm-hmm.
kind of stuff. But stand up, you can focus on the one thing,
Yeah.
and kind of sculpt that, and kind of like you're only answerable to you,
Yeah.
which is very different than film where you have to answer to 100 people. you know
Right. I mean, the crazy thing too, then I guess about stand up is then if you only are answerable yourself, it's up to you whether or not the pressure's there. So you can really fucking suck if you don't put enough pressure on yourself or the
yeah.
right kind of pressure.
That's right.
How have you found the balance over the years trying to make it, because again, I for those who haven't heard or seen your comedy, I will recommend people just go down the rabbit hole on YouTube or something and watch everything you've done, because you make me laugh more than just about anybody. So
Oh, thank you. That's amazing.
you're brilliantly funny, and I think I spent way too much time on Dave's episode of this show saying, so what's his new show like with the iPad? Can you tell me? He's like, I don't know, I haven't seen it. I'm like, but can you give me some idea what it's about, because I'm never going to get to see it? And he's like, I'm sorry. I felt really bad. How do you hold yourself accountable other than just sticking it to yourself? Like, that sounded filthy, but you know what I'm saying.
I think I think the audience is who you're accountable to, you know,
Sure.
and they don't owe you, you know, pity laughs, or like they're the most on. I think it's the most honest response that you can get is
Mm-hmm.
that live audience, because if something's funny, then it's funny, and if it's something, if you're trying to sell something, and they're not buying it, then you're
Mm-hmm.
not selling it well enough, you know. So like that's how that I always hold myself to that account of,
Mm-hmm.
you know, because like, not that audiences are never wrong, because sometimes they are wrong,
Mm-hmm.
but the most part the audience will tell you the God's honest truth,
Mm-hmm.
and and that's the way I kind of um, judge how well I'm doing,
Mm-hmm.
is can I get that point across to an audience, you know, whatever point I'm trying to make, um, and that's kind of that's the test to me. If
Mm-hmm.
the audience buys it, and that's how I keep myself going, is the what is the audience gonna think, you
Because you
know?
can also tell the difference between, because I don't think, I could be wrong, but in case of certain comics, and maybe you're one of them, it's not necessarily did I get a laugh, but did I get a laugh where they knew what the fuck I was talking about? Like, did they actually recognize what I was talking about the whole time?
Yeah, I mean that's the most satisfying, is where everybody, somehow you've steered everybody to be on the same page,
Mm-hmm.
and that feels very satisfying. If you
Yeah.
somehow, not only did you make them laugh, but you, like you say, like you made them understand a concept you were trying to convey, is very, that feels very good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I was going to ask, I was like, well, there are some comedians, right? Who, what about those ones who really don't use the audience as a gauge? And then I realized, no, you're talking about sociopaths. Like, if you never pay attention or
Yeah,
care, that's a problem. But they
and it's
exist.
there are comedians that they see the relationship with the audience as more adversarial,
Sure.
like I'm trying to whip an audience into shape or whatever, and that
Mm-hmm.
sometimes works too,
Yep.
but even then you're still filtering it through what does the audience think, you
Yeah.
know. So that's, I think it's, maybe it's not unique to stand up, but certainly to like live performance, the
Mm-hmm.
audience, they say whether it's good, bad, boring, you know, exciting.
Mm-hmm.
That's a that's very, I think, exists only with live performance, you know.
Right. That makes sense. So okay, good. Well, I'm glad that I at least followed the train of the film school thing, because I had a feeling that might have been maybe the sort of the next step, is that it didn't, you moved from doing that onto stand. But how the hell does that? I know we can keep talking about the Smothers Brothers, but how does that lead to doing it for a living? I do not understand how the hell that, it is still something that perplexes me how that happens.
Yeah, it perplexes me too. And you know, it's now, because of everything that's going on,
Mm-hmm.
it really is challenging the notion of what you do. Like
Yeah.
going to a comedy club is now going to be a risky venture, you know,
Right.
whereas before it was just like the most you could lose was cover, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, I don't know if that's going to affect the ability to make a living off
Mm-hmm.
of it. I mean, it has so far, but I
Sure.
don't know in the long term. But I, for myself, I just, whereas you were saying, like, I think you're based in LA, is that correct?
Yeah.
When you went to LA, they said don't be a hyphenate.
Mm-hmm.
In Canada, and I think also in stand up, you have to be.
Yeah.
You have to be. You can't. There's no. lucky are the few that just do stand-up comedy.
Hmm. Hmm.
You stand up, you act in things, you write punch up, you produce your own show, you do a
Sure.
podcast, you do all these things. Um, and stand up's just one of them. And so you
Yeah.
have to do that in Canada, or you would starve. You would starve
Hmm.
within a year.
Well, that was the other thing too. Is like I've met a lot of people out here who are just like, no, just stick to it. And I did PA work for a long ass time, way too
Yeah, me
long.
too. Yeah.
And once I realized I'm spending 18, and this is, don't get me wrong, there's ego involved here, but 18 hours a day on a project that I had nothing to do the creation of, I was just like,
Sure.
this is hollow for me. Yes, it's money, but let's see if I can do something else. And eventually, sort of found a day job for 10 years that I absolutely hated and hated me. But, it kept
What
me
was that day
afloat.
job?
I don't ever talk about the details, but I will say that it was working in an industry that I hated, doing office work. And I moved up and hated the people enough to manipulate them to pay me the kind of money I needed to make. And then eventually something really crazy happened. And I finally said, oh, no, this is terrible and tearing me apart. And I'm going to quit. So
Yeah.
I have now been back in the real world again for a year and a half. And it's insane. But also, my heart works again. So it's,
That's great.
you know,
That's really good to hear, because I think you everybody can get easily sidetracked by the day job thing, and like especially when you get home after a day
mhm.
at the day job, the last thing you want to do is then do night work.
Right.
you know.
Now I did for 10 years. I was still making that during that 10-year period. That's when I made my 3 movies, but and a billion podcasts, but it was not, it didn't feel, it feels way better now. It's a little,
Where where did those movies end up living? Like,
oh,
where
on
did they
two
go?
of them on YouTube because they're very clearly made by a person who's doing it all himself. I think.
Right.
I think, and then the third has been distributed on DVD and stuff. I don't know why they want to and like digital and shit. So that one's a documentary. That one I'm super proud of because I don't know. There's more to it than the other stuff maybe.
Right. Yeah, and it was probably more your personal voice kind of coming through.
Yeah, these other two are like huge, but they are also part of a performance art thing that I've been doing since 2004, and
Okay.
will maybe end with a podcast this year. We'll see. So 2 movies and a podcast is how it's gonna play out. So I don't
Wow.
know. Yeah, it's insane.
That's cool though. That's
It's
like
fun.
yeah, like yeah, it's just I think you have to a lot of people have to do the day job thing
Hmm.
sometimes their whole creative career.
Sure.
That's just the way it goes. Like I say, very few people get to just I'm a stand-up comedian or I'm a
Yeah.
DJ or whatever and get to do that
Yeah.
their whole life.
Yeah.
Everybody has to do something to pay the bills.
Yeah.
And so it's like I say, the lucky few that
Hmm.
get to do the thing they love exclusively, and that's how they pay their bills. But yeah, it's tough. You got to be
Yeah.
flexible in this biz.
I fear that people like I at some point was, or for a long time was, get ashamed that they also have to have a day. There's no shame. That's just you are trying to exist. That is how That's how it works. We don't live in a
Yeah,
society where we just get money for existing. I'd be fine if we did. Universal basic income, fine. Please bring it on. I'll continue to just do podcasts and look for work.
yeah, and
I'm fine
and
with that.
like there were a lot of people that I grew up, consuming some of their work, as like Bukowski when I was a teenager. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
translate as well to being an adult, but
Mm-hmm.
and then like Harvey Pekar, and
Mm-hmm.
these were guys that had jobs almost the whole time that they were doing what they became known for.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like out of the gates, I got it. I was like, anybody can do their creative thing, but they do need to be able to pay their rent.
Yeah.
So the day job's like it's absolutely part of the formula.
Right.
Yeah.
The starving artist thing has been is a myth for a reason, and people don't
Hmm.
often realize that. It's fun to fantasize about when you're in college, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you do, and I don't think I ever did. I was like, no, I'm immediately going to be a famous movie maker. That's
Right.
where my delusion was. Oh boy, I did not expect that. I apologize. This ended up being more about me, but I do like very much talking about where two film school people have gone with their careers, and it's it does. I think the collaboration, and I think somebody once told me also like Tom Lennon, name drop, did the one piece of advice I got when I was early out here is like green light yourself is what he said. So that was me like, oh well, then I'm gonna have to be a multi hyphenate. I have to make shit myself. So
Yeah.
just make a ton of shit. There's nothing wrong with that. Just keep making things. I do very much, by the way, still want to see your iPad show. I want to know what that was all about. Was it ever recorded? Did you ever put it down for posterity?
No, I didn't. Like, I have the whole show because the whole show was pre-recorded and then played on an iPad that was.
Holy shit! The entire thing was. Oh my god.
Yeah, and it was propped up on on a mast kind of setup, and then.
God damn it.
Yeah. And so it was all pre-recorded with spaces for the audience to laugh, and
God damn it! I'm so annoyed. You have no idea. I'm so annoyed I didn't see it.
I didn't film it because you could see what was happening on the iPad live, but it was hard to the camera kept kind of focusing and unfocusing on the iPad, so it wasn't tapeable.
Right, that makes sense. Son of a bitch. Well, if it ever comes back and people are allowed to go places, then I will gladly pay good money to see that.
All right.
Should we talk some more about the album? Because I feel like people are going to get pissed if I keep distracting us. I could talk about this all day. In Dance Boatman Dance, which is probably the one that's got maybe most of my favorite stuff in it. Just all the terrible mispronunciations and like inability to speak that comes out of Tommy is some of my favorite shit ever.
Yeah.
That he refers to the ships that sailed here as the Sunflower and the Pan Maria. It also starts with him going tasting, 1, 2, 3, and slurping the microphone. So dumb. It's so good.
Yeah,
and also
it's like so gentle, and it's just like if the audience gets it, great. If not, moving right along.
Also, this audience, they're talking during it. There's so much talking. What the fuck was happening at this club?
Yeah, there's a lot of talking, and there's one woman's laugh that is this kind of piercing laugh. She laughs louder than everybody on every joke. But it's that kind of screechy scream laugh. And I always wondered when I would listen to these albums, like, who was that person? Did they know when the album came out that they were so distinguishable? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. One of my dreams is honestly to find a laugh I love on a record, find that person, and interview them. I could talk to them for hours.
That would be an interesting. That would be an interesting audio series. Is you try and track down the laugher. That's a pretty good idea. That could be your next podcast.
I'm tempted. I'm thoroughly tempted. You'd have to prove it. That would also be part of the fun. Like, okay, prove it, please. Please provide audio proof that you are this laugher. If you can't do this just right, I don't know that I'm gonna believe you.
Yeah, I love that, identifying that person. And this album, it's very, it seems like somebody who's maybe snuck into the club, she's maybe too young to actually be there. And maybe she's overcompensating by laughing, but yeah. But I remember the first time I heard this, this was one of those laughs.
Yeah. There's a line here where they're just talking about the people moving west. They looked westward, and he said, like that. So obviously one of them turned their head. They packed up their families, their children.
And doesn't he start by saying they went to California, and then no, we were on the eastern seaboard, and they came through California. No, and then they went west to California.
And then when he says they packed up their chairs and spoons, that knocked me down.
Yeah,
that was one of the lines that my friends and I always repeated because it just was so funny.
Why is that so funny? Do you know what I mean? Because is it spoons? Is that why it's so funny?
Is that on it? It's what the kids call lol so random. It is just, you know what I mean? I wish I could even say it better than that. I almost can't, but it really is just the expectation, I guess, is that they're packing up important things, and then he immediately downgrades that to chairs and then spoons.
Yeah, they packed up their chairs, which is such a funny sentence on its own. And then you throw spoons in there, and it's like it's like a genuine belly laugh.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
and
he
I think
refers to them.
also
Sorry.
like when they're introducing Jezebel, and he's going on about this name and this name, and then he says the name is Marianne, and everybody loses their mind.
Uh-huh.
um, and again, like you're being set up for a punchline, but it doesn't feel that way.
Right. Right.
When they're doing it, it doesn't feel like a construction. It really does
Sure.
feel like Tommy is that guy in that moment that's just kind of rambling over the intro.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
It's this.
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, it just makes me think of how much a comedian in the right perfect headspace who is having a perfect night is like a series of waves coming in, and they're like, you're bringing everybody in, and then eventually it crashes, eventually it comes down, but like you're sucking people in slowly and surely until it's just fucking bam, there's the thing you're waiting for. You didn't know
Yeah. And like in some of their later albums, they would do gags within the song.
Yes.
Either like there's the one where they're singing a beautiful Spanish ballad, and then Tommy starts singing in German, and but they didn't do as much of it on this first album. It really was like all the jokes, the songs stood away from the jokes.
Right.
Like
Right.
the
Right.
songs were just, if you took out the intros, it would have just been a nice folk album.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of the weird thing about it is, like I don't know how familiar you are with Tom Waits.
A little.
A little. I think his album Nighthawks at the Diner is patterned after the Smothers Brothers,
Really?
because he does these long kind of jokey intros to every song. He even name checks the Smothers Brothers on the album.
Okay. All right.
And like I say, all the jokes are independent of the songs, but every joke track has its own track, and then the song starts on the next track. And it seems to me very, very reminiscent of the way that the Smothers Brothers kind of structure their act. Yeah.
I did not know that. And now you've just convinced me to listen to what is probably already considered a classic album by many, but that's what's going to pull me in.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I wouldn't have thought of it if he hadn't name checked the Smothers Brothers on the album.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's just the type of album. Like, I wish this album was 2 hours long. Like I I listened to it this morning before the podcast, and it just whipped by. And I would, like, honestly, I could do with another if it was a double album. It was so nice. It was so nice to sit there and listen to, but it's also not the type of thing that demands your attention the whole time, as stand-up often does.
Right.
You get that kind of mental break when they're singing these songs, and then you queue up for another joke.
Right.
Yeah.
Like beautiful, perfect character comedy that
Yeah.
somehow sustains for whatever those are, 10 or 11 albums. They're all good. Every one of them is a good record. And maybe that is why I own all of them, and maybe it is a brag, if only because, like, I've got, like, again, if you want more than, that's fucking 4, 5, 6 hours of comedy there.
Totally.
That I can pretty much always listen to. This is what happens on this show sometimes, is like, I don't totally get burnout on comedy records, but then when somebody brings one back where I'm like, oh, right, this is why I started the podcast in the first fucking place. This is one of the first records we talked about. And this is absolutely I don't know. I will listen to this again soon because it's just that good.
Yeah, like I said, I listened to it this morning, and I hadn't listened to it for a couple of years.
Same, yeah.
And it was just, it was instantly back to the first time that I heard the Smothers Brothers. Like, it just, and like I say, if I didn't know better, I would have thought that a lot of the banter was just riffing that night. So I don't know how they do it.
Yeah.
even as a performer, I don't know how you make it seem live and that you're just coming up with it, but actually you've done it hundreds and hundreds of times the
Yeah.
exact same way, but it still seems so loose.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Is
I
it
don't
safe to
know.
assume for you though then that night after night there's at least a little, even if it's just to mix it up for your own brain, or like what is there a reason you don't try and do it exactly the same every night? It's not musical, so that's one reason.
Yeah. And also just personal boredom,
Yeah,
you
I would
know?
imagine. Yeah.
Like and you know what, it takes all different stripes in comedy. There's some people who do the act the exact same way every
Mm-hmm.
night, and that works for them, and that's how they're great on stage. uh, and so I look almost in awe at those people,
Mm-hmm.
and the Smothers Brothers would be at the top of that list, you know,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
so polished, so perfect.
There was I don't know if this happened to you, but I picked up on a joke that in 30 years of listening to this, I've never ever caught before. So it's at the opening of the Jezebel bit where they're talking about how it's about this poor lady who's dealing with some mental problems. She goes to see a bunch of psychoceramists, which is very stupid. And they name check Freud and Jung, as they call him. And then they mention Pavlov. And I
Oh
remember
yeah.
the joke of every time he rang a bell, she was ready. Wink, wink. And then I never ever caught when he said, "Yeah, she couldn't ride a trolley car." Ding, 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 ding,
Yeah,
ding.
yeah,
I
yeah, she could
never
ride a
caught
trailer
that
car.
jog that joke before. It's stupid,
And
but it's beautiful.
it's one of those things where, because I didn't know this, but most of the album, because of technical difficulties, was taped in Texas, I think.
Oh, wait, yes, I remember talking about that with somebody. Okay.
Yeah. And anyways, the fact, like, that trolley car is very San Francisco,
Uh
you
huh.
know,
Yeah, yeah.
like it is a very kind of places it in San Francisco a bit.
It's a
But yeah,
very good
the
point.
Pavlov's dog thing was fantastic. So funny.
It's so dumb. And it's all dumb. I mean, like all of my favorite comedy has to have, I think, an element of dumb. I mean, because you know who the fuck wants to see somebody smarter than them? I guess unless they're watching John Hodgman. But even John Hodgman knows when to be dumb. Like his
Yeah.
bit is always there's a little bit of dumbness in his apparent pomposity. There's always if you can work those two together, it's beautiful.
Yeah, and like, do you find a lot of people that listen to the podcast? Do they then go and listen to the album?
I can't really tell if people are already familiar and want to hear you talk about something they're familiar with because I have podcasts where that's definitely the case. I've got a
Right,
podcast about news radio. These people have already watched the show a million times, but they still want to
right.
hear us talk about it. So I don't know. I know a few times people have said, "Hey, you helped me discover blankety blank," so that does help.
Yeah,
So that does happen.
that's cool.
Yeah, it's fun. And then sometimes we literally do talk about albums where an hour after the guest is like, "No, I would not recommend listening to this album. It's not that good." And that's
Oh,
happened a few
really?
times. Yeah,
Wow.
and it's either on revisit or on just sheerly discussing how terrible it is. Pardo was on a couple weeks ago and we talked about the Comic Relief 1986 album and it's bad.
Is
It
it
is.
bad?
It's real bad, except for it's 86. So keep in mind how this is hosted by Whoopi Goldberg, Billy Crystal, Robin Williams. The best part of it was Carl Reiner and Sid Caesar. Those two are the
Really?
funniest part of it, and doing a bit from your show of shows. So
That's amazing.
yeah, so
1986. Wow.
yeah, yeah, it's rough. It's rough.
Yeah, man. That's I remember that. I remember that as a kid watching Comic Relief.
Hmm.
And just like I say, you consumed stand up any which way you
Of
could.
course,
So Comic Relief would be like a reliable, they put out a video cassette every year of it.
sure.
And they would sometimes have like really funny people on it that were just doing a set.
Yeah.
But overall, it was bad.
Hmm.
You know, overall, it was, I don't know, it was bad
Wait, did they
stuff.
replay? Did you get the UK Comic Relief too, since you're Canada, or just the American one?
Just the American one. Yeah.
Huh. I have wanted to compare the two because UK Comic Relief also released a record that same year. I kind
Oh,
of want to
really?
see if Lenny Henry's any better than Rob. I know Lenny Henry's funny, but there's a lot of shit on there that I probably would never have heard of. I'm sure even.
That's my favorite part about going over to the UK was discovering that there's this whole like bizarro comedy world
Hmm.
that are like there's different people that fit into different kinds of archetypes,
Mm-hmm.
and just people I've never ever heard of before.
Yeah.
It was great. It was like, yeah, it was like finding a box full of comic books at a garage sale. It was just
Yeah.
like just finding, okay, yeah, like there's this guy, and there's a comedian, and they're endorsing this type of hotel, and you're
Uh-huh.
like, who the hell are they? Who the hell are they?
Right.
Yeah.
It's interesting what reaches you guys and what doesn't. Do you have a quick moment for me to talk? Because here's the problem. Everybody knows and listens to the show. If I have a Canadian on, we're going to have to talk Canadian content for at least a minute.
Yeah, absolutely.
I, you've done a lot of Canadian TV. Have you ever had to deal with that personally, Canadian content stuff, or has it never been your purview?
Like, do I have to do stuff that's Canadian content
Yeah,
based?
has that ever been an issue? I guess that's a
No.
producer thing, really.
Yeah, the fact that I'm on any shows, it counts as
Right.
Canadian content. Like,
Makes sense.
so, and it's weird. It's like CanCon really did a lot of amazing work for music,
Sure.
but the television side of it and the movie side of it weren't held to that same kind of rigor.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not quite as helpful as it
Mm-hmm.
was for music. Because
Right.
like with music, there was an absolute percentage every hour that you had to play
Mm-hmm.
Canadian music, so it fostered a whole scene.
Sure.
But TV doesn't have that same strict limit,
Okay. Okay.
and that's kind of where stand up lived for a long time, was TV.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Like, like I'm sure back in the 60s and 70s, stand up was like album
Mm-hmm.
and radio.
Yeah.
And then I think during the 80s and 90s, it was cable television. That's where stand up lived.
Yeah.
And in Canada, yeah, you can get tax breaks and stuff by
Mm-hmm.
making a Canadian production. And like I say, the networks have to produce a certain amount to
Sure.
keep their license. So anything that I would be on would be just automatically considered CanCon.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I think I became fascinated with it knowing just because of the sheer fact that they were parodying the very idea of it on SCTV so much. I
Yeah.
think that's the thing that made me so fascinated with it, I guess.
Yeah, it's like this weird thing that Canada's had to do
Mm-hmm.
because we're so close to the States.
Yeah.
Because like if you go to Norway, you go to Sweden, they have their own independent film culture and television
Mm-hmm.
culture, because there's a language change.
Yeah.
But there isn't that between Canada and America. So, and we're sitting next to the biggest entertainment producer in the world.
Right.
So we had to, like, government had to literally step in and be like, no, you must
It's
you
fair.
must make this much Canadian content, otherwise we will just be snowed under.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, though, like the more I think about this collection, this asinine collection of records I've got sitting here, I can only think of two overtly, obviously Canadian records that I have. And I'm wondering, even after my obsession with CanCon and comedy from everywhere, obviously I'm only going to get certain things, but I've got The Great White North, which is a great record, but it is obviously it's
Fantastic
kind of a
record.
universal hit, but it is one of the best sketch comedy records I've ever heard. Then there's
Absolutely.
one called My Fellow Canadians, which is Rich Little.
Wait, Rich Little. That's
It is
right.
it is basically a response to the first Family record, which is the biggest hit of all time, at least in America.
What was that guy's name again?
Von Meter.
Von Meter. Yeah,
Von
yeah,
Meter. I'm obsessed with him. He's got an interesting story. I interviewed his widow on this show once, and
Get out.
yeah, it was a really good interview. But I want to talk to Rich Little because I will tell you, I listen to My Fellow Canadians, and not being Canadian or in 1960, I got zero because it was all referential. It was all,
Yeah.
which is great though. I mean, it should exist. That should exist. But I do literally need somebody that old and that Canadian to walk me through it.
Yeah. Like, I would listen to it and I wouldn't get it either.
Right.
Because it's, like if they're talking about Diefenbaker, I don't know what he sounds like,
That's probably a good impression, I guess. Like, I mean, it's weird, right, that JFK has become a thing that is recognized probably worldwide as I mean, to the point where if you watch The Simpsons, you know that they're doing JFK when they're doing when Mayor Quimby speaks, that kind of
Yes.
thing. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
it's a fairly, even if you don't know where it's from, it's a universal thing. It is weird that a parody of this dead guy, like, it's weird. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a strange element of comedy.
The
Um,
other Canadian kind of like from the album era,
mhm.
there's a duo called McLean and McLean, and
Oh,
they were very big in Canada in the 70s.
mm-hmm.
And
I'm gonna write this one down.
yeah, they're kind of like some of their stuff is like musical and lots of like drug references and the like. But
Mm-hmm.
they were very popular in the 70s. And then I'm trying to think of who else would have been like.
By the way, very quickly, I'm an idiot. Tommy Chong is Canadian too. I,
Yes,
keep,
that's right.
I
Yeah,
should not. I
absolutely.
should not disregard that.
But it's weird because Canada's kind of domestic comedy output didn't really start until the 80s,
Mm-hmm.
stand up wise. I
Sure,
mean,
sure, sure,
there were other things that were Canadian that got out there.
sure.
Um, there was what do they call Wayne and Schuster
Yep.
was they were like the most booked act ever on Ed Sullivan,
You
I
know what?
think.
I'm an idiot. Also have one of their albums. So there we are.
Yeah, and they were on forever. I mean, when I was a kid, I'd watch it, and even then, it was very dated and kind
Mm-hmm.
of cornball. But
Mm-hmm.
it translated. It translated across the border
Mm-hmm.
in a way that Rich Little's album probably did not.
Yeah. 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 That it.
Yeah,
That's kind of a. I mean, those were all kind of a roll of the dice when all these people made these different First Family like albums. But like, I do. Again, that's why I'd like to speak to Rich Little just about that album. Like, what were you shooting for? Were you hoping that the recognition? I'd love to know how well it sold in Canada. I
I
would
bet
like to
you
know.
it. I think it like it probably did really well in
Mm-hmm.
Canada, but that would be a small number American wise. You know what I mean?
Okay, sure, sure, sure. I guess that's
Yeah.
possible.
When I was a kid, there was a two radio shows that were all about Canadian politics and people doing impressions of Canadian politicians and the like. And the better of the two was called Double Exposure.
Okay.
And it was so local. It was so just like it was impressions of different premiers and the prime minister. I think the only international person they imitated was the Queen.
Okay.
Yeah, so like, and then maybe like an American president might sneak in there, but really, really tangentially.
Sure.
So, yeah, I think that's probably what Rich Little was going for, that
Yeah.
same little tiny slice of the market.
Yeah.
But who knows?
Ah, it's fascinating to me. I love this stuff, and I would never have discovered it if it weren't for A, an obsession with the First Family, and B, an obsession with Canadian comedy. There's another one that I don't have the physical one. One fan who's like, you like Canadian comedy? Here, let me send you a few things. Let me sneak you some stuff. One of them, though, is Lorne Michaels with his first comedy partner, Hart Pomerantz,
Yeah, yeah.
who I've been trying to get on this podcast. He and I have talked a few times. He's got some interesting things to say about Lorne Michaels. That's one I really want to listen to and talk about because I feel like that's a weird moment that launched, again, something huge in the U.S., but, massive Canadian influence on U.S. comedy.
Yeah, and I remember reading an interview with Lauren Michaels about why he's not a performer, why he became kind of a producer, and
Mm-hmm.
that he was on stage not with Pomerantz but somebody else, and they were doing a sketch, and he looked into the eyes of the other person and realized that person was the character they were playing, and he was just a guy reciting lines, and so he was just like, I'm not gonna do this anymore. Like, people are more committed to it and they're better at it, so
That
I'll
is
move
better
on down the road.
self-awareness than a lot of performers have. That's you know what, good for him. In that
Yeah,
case,
and it like shows like you say, kind of like an introspection that maybe his fellow performers did not have.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm. Maybe.
and it worked out all right for him.
Yeah. I do not want to take up your entire day, much as I could talk to you all day. So, what's your favorite track off this album, if you've got one?
I mean, singing wise, and like I think I like They Call the Wind Maria.
Sure, yeah, it's a good one.
Yeah. And but I also like Dance Boatman Dance because it's fast. It's just like
True.
fast folk song, and that's the track where he's talking about the sailors going into town and getting their oars. And so I like that intro, and I like that song. It clips along really well, and
Yeah,
yeah, I think that's probably my favorite track.
that's
How
fair.
about you?
I kind of think I'm the same, and it's because I mean every note that I was taking it as I was listening to it, and I literally had to drop my shit and stop at one point because again hadn't heard it in so long, and yeah, actually had a weird well whatever we don't have to go into it, but I had a weird emotional reaction to it. We will just say, and that is one of the reasons I'm like, oh fuck, I'm so glad that this happened. I'm so glad that you picked this album.
What was the emotional
Well,
reaction
okay,
to it?
I will tell you if you're willing to listen to it. It's
Sure.
long story short, my friends and I, my two best friends and I, like I said, listened to this and had jokes. And one of my friends, it was pretty tragic, but he died. And because one of the jokes that popped up that he would repeat all the time and informed his sense of humor, which then informed my sense of humor. I was just like laughing, and then like stopped and just started bawling my eyes out. And I'm like, oh,
Oh wow.
this is a moment. I just had a
Yeah.
real fucking moment, and I, honest to God, have you to thank for it because it's like
Oh man.
it's weird. I hadn't had, and he's we've known that he's been dead for 2 years, and all of a sudden there's just like whoosh. So it was weird moment, but
Yeah,
good,
and
but good.
and like it's weird how a comedy bit can also trigger like reactions and emotions like a song can.
Yes,
Yeah.
right, 100%. Ooh, lost my microphone. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
because
I
I
don't know.
I remember where I was when I first was listening to the Smothers Brothers records,
Mm-hmm.
and they take me right back, to that house I was living in and what was going on in my life and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's as powerful as a song.
Yeah,
And luckily, this album also has songs.
thank God, right? I just that's weird. I've never had that moment with a guy. This is a weird breaking point in a good way for the podcast. So I don't know. I thought that was cool. It was a nice moment to have, and I don't know. It's a good album. This is a good record.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
was like,
absolutely. And it's nice. I think that's nice that you had a moment with it.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's never happened. That was pretty great. Graham, sorry, Graham. I want to say it right. I keep doing the Americanized Graham. That's not fair. You're not a measurement of mass or weight.
Thank you.
You have been so delightful to sit here and do this. I really appreciate it. This is going to come out not next Wednesday, but the following Wednesday.
Okay.
Tell people where they can find you, what they should listen to or watch. If you have anything coming up, I don't know if you're doing any Zoom shows like some of us idiots are doing.
No Zoom shows. I mean, I put out a podcast every week with my friend Dave Shumka called "Stop Podcasting Yourself."
The best
And
podcast.
thank you. I've been in this kind of self-isolation era. I've been painting using my beard as a paintbrush.
Mm-hmm.
And then I sell these paintings, and then the money goes to whatever charity. If somebody has a particular charity they work with, it goes to that. If not, it goes to Food Banks Canada.
So good.
And yeah, that's what I've been doing to keep busy the last while. So, but if you want to check them out, beardpaintings.com or grahamclark.com, you can find them there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's what's going on. That's what's cooking.
This has been so nice. I really appreciate it. Honest to God, this has been super fun. I've been looking forward
Thank
to
you
this
for
for
putting up with
years.
all the back and forth forever and ever. I'm glad this finally happened. We did it.
Me too. You're no pressure, but you're welcome back anytime. This was an absolute delight.
I
We can
would
talk
love
about
to come back and talk about a couple Canadian albums.
Yes.
Like specifically. There was a guy I wanted to I would guess I would have to upload the album because I can't find it anywhere online.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a guy, it's an album I thought was so funny. It's by a guy who doesn't do stand up anymore named Alan Watt.
Okay, wait a minute. Okay, sounds familiar.
Yeah, he's a writer. He wrote books. Like he kind of gave up stand up to write books.
Okay.
And anyways, his album's so funny.
Okay.
But I think I still have a hard copy of it somewhere. And if I can rip it and send it, that would be a good one to chat about.
That would be fucking amazing. I would love to do that. 'Cause
Yeah.
That was one thing I forgot to ask you. Like, one of my favorite things about traveling the country when that was a possibility was, or being in the UK, was like trying to find local comedians on their records, because that was a huge thing. It was the only way where people were making their money outside of the club money. You know, that was their side
Yeah.
money. They didn't do
Yeah.
T-shirts. Have you ever run into any like old school local Canadian comics, or was that not a thing at the time? Like
Like,
getting
you
their
mean
records.
that we're selling albums?
Yeah, like in in an old record shop, because that's where I like finding like 50-year-old records of comics who are no longer around.
Yeah, like I'll say like more of them probably existed on CD than
Sure,
on
that's fair.
vinyl. But there's for sure there was a guy named Mike McDonald who I think put out at least one album. There's a guy named Mike Bullard who put out an album that I would find in thrift stores a lot. Yeah, it's funny because like I know the era specifically that you're talking about when people did sell albums after shows, and they don't really do that anymore. Like, some do, but it's
Sure.
mostly here's the download code,
Yeah.
or you can just listen to it for free on Spotify now. You know?
Yeah, right. Give me no money.
Yeah, exactly. But once in a while, I would find an album at a thrift store that was signed by the comedian.
Always,
It was
yeah.
obviously bought at a comedy club and then tossed away.
Yeah, I know. That's
Yeah.
It makes me sad, but it's also like I kind of get it also. Like, it's, you know, you supported the person. There's that at least.
Yeah, exactly.
And maybe you're dead. I don't know how
Yeah,
it
yeah.
ended up here.
I don't know your life.
Graham, thank you so much. Thank you guys for listening, and as always, have a good thing. Comedy on Vinyl is a production of Stolen Dress Entertainment. It is produced by Mike Worden and is hosted and edited by Jason Klamm. Our theme song was composed and performed by Richard Levinson. You can email us at podcast@comedyonvinyl.com. You can also send snail mail to Stolen Dress Entertainment, P.O. Box 805, Burbank, California, 91503. Subscribe to Comedy on Vinyl on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and anywhere else you can find podcasts. Give us a 5-star rating and write us a review. It helps. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Comedy on Vinyl, or find everything in one place at comedyonvinyl.com. A major portion of Comedy on Vinyl has been underwritten by Stand Up Records. Please visit standuprecords.com for all your comedy needs, and tune in to the new Stand Up Records channel available on the Roku, where you can also find select episodes of this podcast. Visit stolendress.com to listen to our other podcasts, watch videos, and imbibe freely of our multimedia content going back 15 plus years. Dress Entertainment.
Hey, it's my turn. Ah!